General Hospital spoilers reveal that Sonny had always known that the life he led came with shadows. Shadows that trailed him from backroom deals to whispered threats in alleyways. But nothing could have. Prepared him for the devastating blow that arrived on what was supposed to be the most joyous and sacred day for his family. Daisy's baptism was meant to symbolize rebirth, unity, and faith. It was to be a moment of peace, a pause in the storm of conflict that had surrounded the Corinthos family for months. And yet, within minutes, everything unraveled. The church was packed with family and friends, their hearts softened by hymns and prayer, their hopes high for a new chapter. But as the service began and the air filled with incense and quiet reverence, a storm was quietly gathering outside. One that Sonny hadn't seen coming, because it wasn't made of bullets or enemies with vendettas, but of secrets, legal traps. And a calculated betrayal from someone who had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Ada Justine Turner stood at the back of the church that morning, silent and composed, waiting for her cue. She had been planning this moment for weeks, working in the shadows of Sonny's increasingly unstable alliances. As the ceremony reached its most vulnerable and emotional peak, Turner stepped forward. Her voice cutting through the choir's final verse like a blade. She didn't need to shout. The words she spoke were sharper than any raised volume. She revealed that new evidence had surfaced, documents, surveillance, witness testimonies, all pointing to Sonny's involvement in an off-the-books operation that violated multiple federal statutes. The evidence was damning. And it came from within. Someone close to Sonny had turned on him, feeding the ADA exactly what she needed. Sonny didn't resist when officers approached. He didn't argue or lash out. He simply turned, locking eyes with his family, particularly with Daisy, who stood stunned in her white baptismal gown. Her innocence colliding with the harsh truth of the world she was being baptized into. Handcuffed in front of the altar, Sonny became a symbol of collapse. The crowd that had moments before smiled and prayed was now whispering, gasping, pulling back in fear and confusion. Michael froze, unable to speak. Sasha clutched Daisy, trying to shield her from the storm. Carly's hands trembled, but her eyes were already scanning the room, calculating, trying to piece together who had betrayed them. Jason, watching from the side aisle, clenched his jaw so hard he could barely breathe, already anticipating the fallout that was about to rain down. This wasn't just an arrest. This was an execution of reputation, an assault on the heart of the Corinthos family. And it had been orchestrated to happen in the most public and spiritually vulnerable moment possible. What stung most wasn't the betrayal or the handcuffs. It was the realization that Sonny hadn't seen it coming. Despite all his instincts, all his paranoia and power. Someone had slipped through the cracks, someone he trusted. The question burned silently through every member of his family as the officers walked him out of the church. Cameras already clicking outside the doors. Who did this? The news spread across Port Charles in minutes. The media swarmed, headlines forming before the baptismal water had even dried. Sonny Corinthos arrested during child's baptism. The perfect storm had been crafted, and Ada Turner knew exactly what she was doing. This was a show. A statement. And it worked. But the consequences of this public takedown rippled far beyond embarrassment. In Sonny's absence, enemies surged. Sidwell, long seething in the shadows, saw an opportunity. With Sonny's influence publicly dismantled and his family emotionally shattered, Sidwell began moving in with precision. Unconfirmed sightings of his men near Corinthos properties flooded police channels. Nina, still reeling from her own betrayals, grew increasingly unstable. Willow, fighting her own mental unraveling, broke down completely upon hearing the news, whispering that she always knew something like this would happen. Drew, far from being a comfort, only intensified the chaos. Using Sonny's arrest to fuel his own campaign for control. Meanwhile, Jason began to quietly investigate, going through old logs, digging through digital trails. Tracing who within Sonny's circle might have flipped. What he found stunned even him. Someone had been accessing confidential files related to Daisy, to past shipments. To side deals Sonny thought were buried. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a dismantling from within. Someone had been planning this for a long time. The more Jason uncovered, the clearer it became, this wasn't over. In fact, this was just the beginning. Daisy, meanwhile, refused to speak after the baptism. She sat curled on Sasha's lap, eyes wide, lips trembling. Unable to process the trauma of seeing her godfather dragged away in cuffs. Sasha, herself no stranger to grief and public scandal, tried to hold it together, but inside, she knew the truth. This baptism would haunt Daisy forever. It was no longer a symbol of hope. It had become a moment of horror. Holly, who had quietly arrived in town days before, emerged from the crowd after the arrest. She had been watching, waiting. Unlike the others, she suspected this day would come. She had warned Sonny. Hinted that there were eyes in places even he couldn't see. And now, with the arrest complete and the Corinthos family in disarray, Holly approached Jason in the shadows of the chapel. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Both knew that what had begun here would change Port Charles forever. And neither of them would stop until they found out who orchestrated it, and why. Back at the police station, Sonny sat alone in an interrogation room, the buzz of fluorescent lights above, the echo of slammed doors behind. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. For every move made against him, there would be 3 in return. He may have been arrested, but he wasn't defeated. Not yet. Because the truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface. And when it did, those responsible would understand that they hadn't just taken down a kingpin, they had declared war. And Sonny never lost a war. Sidwell was no longer operating in the shadows, he was stepping into full view, his presence now felt in every corner of Port Charles like a storm front moving in slow, deliberate patterns. With each passing day, his grip tightened. He was no longer content with subtle manipulation or whispered threats behind closed doors. This was a man driven by a vision, dark and calculated. And he was now ready to initiate a level of control that would reshape the city's balance of power entirely. What made Sidwell particularly dangerous was not just his resources or connections, it was his patience, his ability to wait until the precise moment to strike, and the moment had now arrived. The recent upheavals in Sonny's empire had created the perfect opening, and Sidwell intended to exploit it fully, not just by targeting Sonny's territory, but by orchestrating an elaborate psychological siege that placed Sonny in the most dangerous position of all, utter vulnerability. What began as a series of minor disruptions, a delayed shipment here, an anonymous leak there, quickly escalated into a series of calculated betrayals. Trusted allies began to fold under pressure. Some disappeared, others were found flipped. But it became clear in the days that followed that it wasn't an isolated action. It was a piece of Sidwell's broader strategy: expose Sonny in front of his family, strip him of his authority publicly, then step into the vacuum and claim control. The psychological toll of that spectacle, the look in Daisy's eyes as Sonny was taken away in cuffs, was as much a part of the attack as the charges themselves. Sidwell's strategy was rooted in chaos. He didn't just want Sonny arrested, he wanted Sonny isolated, paranoid, and emotionally broken. To achieve this, Sidwell began reaching into Sonny's closest circles, whispering doubts, exposing secrets, playing people against each other. Rumors spread that someone inside Sonny's home had helped build the case. Jason began to suspect, but he was always one step too late. Chasing leads that dissolved into silence. The police department, bogged down by pressure from ADA Turner's office, began treating Sonny not as a suspect, but as a criminal already convicted. Even longtime allies like Brick and Spinelli found themselves stonewalled, their surveillance systems mysteriously compromised. And through it all, Sidwell remained invisible. A ghost whose fingerprints were never left behind, yet whose presence was unmistakable. What made Sidwell's ascent truly terrifying was the precision with which he predicted Sonny's every move. When Sonny attempted to relocate Natalia and Donna to a secure safe house, the address was already compromised. When Carly tried to call in favors from out-of-town allies, the calls were blocked or intercepted. And when Dante tried to use his badge to slow down the judicial momentum, he was met with threats of internal investigation. Every time Sonny reached for support, the hand he grabbed had already been poisoned. The city was turning against him, not just through legal channels, but in whispers on the streets. In the fearful eyes of vendors, in the doors that closed a second too quickly when Sonny approached. It wasn't just about crime. It was about perception, and Sidwell was winning that war. The most chilling part of Sidwell's takeover, however, came not from what he did to Sonny, but what he did to those Sonny loved. Sasha began receiving anonymous packages, photos of Daisy's baptism. Footage from security cameras Sonny thought had been wiped clean, images showing Sonny's arrest from multiple angles. Each delivery was wrapped in notes that simply read, "This is what protection looks like when you trust the wrong man." Willow, already in the throes of emotional and psychological collapse, began to spiral further. Whispering to herself that Drew was next, that they were all being hunted. And Michael, who had once believed he could rise above the chaos, found himself trapped. His business dealings stalled by mysterious audits and false accusations. No one was safe. That was Sidwell's message. Yet through it all, Sonny remained standing, beaten, bruised, betrayed. But not broken. And that, perhaps, was Sidwell's final miscalculation. Because where Sidwell saw victory, Sonny saw clarity. For the first time in months, Sonny understood the shape of the enemy. He wasn't fighting a rival mobster. He was fighting a visionary, a man who saw Port Charles not as territory to be conquered, but as a kingdom to be rebuilt in his own image. And Sonny knew that to defeat someone like Sidwell, he would have to become something even darker. Something even more calculating. Because the old rules no longer applied. The streets were no longer just about control, they were about survival, legacy, and retribution. And so, even as Sidwell celebrated his tightening grip, even as he stood in a high-rise office watching Port Charles shift beneath his influence, Sonny was already preparing a response. Not loud, not violent, not yet. But methodical. Relentless. And personal. Because no one destroys Sonny Corinthos without consequences. And when the reckoning comes, it will not arrive in handcuffs. It will arrive like a shadow, without warning. And it will end with a single truth, that the deeper Sidwell reached into Sonny's world, the closer he brought himself to the fire. And in Port Charles, fire always burns back. Sonny was facing a level of pressure unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It wasn't the familiar tension of territorial disputes or rival mob families, it was deeper, more strategic. And disturbingly personal. The walls were closing in from all sides, and for the first time in years, Sonny was beginning to feel truly vulnerable. The coordinated nature of the attacks, the legal ambush led by Ada Turner, the psychological warfare executed by Sidwell, and the crumbling trust within his closest circles, had placed him in a position where every decision felt like a trap, every ally a potential liability. The mounting tension had become a suffocating presence, a force that couldn't be ignored, and one that demanded immediate recalibration of everything Sonny once believed about control and power. There was no longer any room for pride. He had to reach out for help, not just from enforcers or associates, but from people who could steady the world beneath his feet. Who could remind him of his humanity when everything around him was designed to tear it away? Laura, with her enduring presence and moral compass, represented a kind of clarity that Sonny desperately needed. Despite their differing paths, there was a long-standing respect between them. Rooted in shared history and moments of crisis that neither could forget. Laura had seen Sonny at his best and worst. And her ability to remain calm amidst chaos was something he now valued more than ever. As the mayor, her political connections and understanding of the town's shifting dynamics could become a crucial shield against Sidwell's creeping influence. Sonny didn't just need her support in a public sense, he needed her voice of reason, someone unafraid to challenge him. Someone whose perspective came from a place of sincerity rather than fear or allegiance. Reaching out to her was not a sign of weakness, it was a recognition that survival now required alliance. Not isolation. Carly, however, was something else entirely. She was not just a partner or an ex-wife. She was a mirror to Sonny's instincts, a woman whose fire matched his own. Whose loyalty ran bone deep, even when love had frayed. Carly had always thrived in moments of chaos. Where others ran, she stood firm. And now, with Sonny's world unraveling and enemies advancing from the shadows, Carly was stepping forward not just to defend him, but to defend everything they had ever built together. She understood the language of war, of secrets and whispers, and her intelligence-gathering skills had become invaluable. She had begun to see patterns Sonny couldn't, gaps in communication. People acting out of character, movements that hinted at internal sabotage. Her return to the center of Sonny's life wasn't about romance, it was about strategy. And Sonny, for all his instincts, was wise enough to know that Carly's presence could be the difference between annihilation and survival. The alliance between Sonny, Laura, and Carly represented not just a tactical adjustment, it was the emergence of a new command structure. Together, they brought balance, Laura's reason, Carly's ruthlessness, and Sonny's resilience. But even as they regrouped, the pressure continued to rise. Sidwell was not slowing down. In fact, the more resistance he faced, the more brutal his methods became. Anonymous threats turned into physical attacks. Sonny's legitimate businesses were hit with federal audits and mysterious legal holdups. His children began receiving cryptic messages, clearly intended to provoke fear and insecurity. Donna's school reported unusual visitors lurking nearby. Christina's activism events were interrupted by coordinated disruptions. Even Michael, though estranged from Sonny, couldn't fully escape the reach of Sidwell's influence. It became clear that the war wasn't just about Sonny anymore. It was about every single person he loved. And that was the final, cruel twist. Sidwell wasn't targeting Sonny's empire, he was targeting Sonny's soul. By threatening the people Sonny lived for, he was trying to strip him of hope, to make every choice Sonny faced come with unbearable cost. The baptism of Daisy had already turned into a symbol of that emotional terrorism, what should have been a celebration marred by Sonny's arrest, Daisy's tears. And Sasha's collapse under the weight of it all. The image of Sonny being taken in handcuffs, surrounded by family and faith, was now imprinted on the collective psyche of Port Charles. And Sidwell had made sure of that, leaking photos to tabloids, feeding footage to social media, ensuring the humiliation was public and complete. But something dangerous was stirring beneath Sonny's surface. Not desperation. Not fear. But resolve. The deeper Sidwell pushed, the more Sonny began to understand that he would need to become something more than he had ever been before. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost territory or clearing his name. This was about rewriting the rules of engagement. Sonny had survived betrayals, assassinations, loss, and war, but never like this. Never with the full weight of the law, the streets, and his own emotional world collapsing around him. And yet, with Laura's political steadiness and Carly's tactical aggression beside him, he was beginning to chart a new path forward, one where he would no longer be simply reacting, but striking first. Every whispered meeting, every hidden message now carried a different tone. Sonny was preparing for something bigger, something final. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. And he certainly wasn't going to let Sidwell win. Because in the end, Port Charles wasn't just a place Sonny protected. It was part of him. And if Sidwell thought he could take that from him without consequence, he had no idea just how far Sonny was willing to go to protect it. The war had already begun. The pressure was only the beginning. What came next would shake the foundations of every alliance, every legacy, and every secret buried beneath the surface. And when the reckoning came, it would not be quiet. It would be cataclysmic. The world around Sonny was beginning to unravel in ways he could no longer contain. The carefully constructed fortress he had built to shield his family and hold his enemies at bay was crumbling. Not from external gunfire or sudden betrayal, but from the slow and deliberate corrosion of power, reputation, and emotional equilibrium. What had once been a position of dominance was now a battlefield of chaos, where every move invited another blow, and every ally became a potential target. The baptism of Daisy, meant to be a peaceful, sacred moment for his family, had descended into a public nightmare. His arrest, choreographed in front of friends, family, and press, shattered any illusion that his enemies played by rules. It was no longer just Sunny's fight, it was personal for everyone who carried his name or his legacy. Even the children were no longer safe from the shadows. For young Daisy, the trauma was instantaneous. She could barely comprehend the sudden shift from joyful celebration to confusion and fear as officers stormed the church and pulled her grandfather away. Her eyes, once filled with innocence, were now etched with images she would never forget: Sunny's restrained arms, Sasha's panicked cries, and the helpless expressions of those too stunned to act. The child's sense of safety had been ripped away, replaced with an inescapable question: if even Sunny couldn't protect them, who could? That image, of a child trembling as the world collapses around her, haunted everyone in Sunny's inner circle. It became the embodiment of the new war being waged, not with bullets or bribes, but with psychological terror designed to uproot the very heart of who Sunny was. This wasn't just a legal maneuver or a vendetta, it was a coordinated dismantling of a man's identity. And it was working. The community watched with a mixture of horror and curiosity as Sunny, once untouchable, was publicly dragged through the mud. The tabloids had a field day. Talk shows speculated. Allies became silent. Enemies cheered. And worst of all, children like Daisy, who should have known only love and laughter, were now forced to understand the cruelty of the world far too soon. But amid the collapse, something powerful was also being born, a reckoning. The shock of Daisy's baptism being desecrated became more than just another scandal. It became a symbol. It proved that even sacred ground was no longer off limits, and it woke something dormant in Sunny, a resolve that no amount of legal pressure, public humiliation, or psychological warfare could extinguish. The incident became a turning point, not just for Sunny, but for the entire Corinthos family. It forced everyone, Laura, Carly, Michael, even Christina, to look inward and ask what they were willing to sacrifice to reclaim their peace, and what lines they would cross to protect their own. This adjustment in Sunny's world wasn't just a response to chaos, it was a new way of seeing. It shattered old assumptions and forced an evolution in strategy, loyalty, and leadership. No longer could Sunny rely on past methods or old alliances. The game had changed, and so must he. The shock of the moment wasn't just in the violence or the arrest, it was in the clarity it brought. Sunny could no longer afford to protect everyone by standing at the front. He would need others to rise beside him, shoulder the weight, and strike with equal force and precision. And so, as Daisy tried to sleep that night, her small frame curled beneath the blankets, trembling from what she'd seen, Sunny sat alone in his holding cell, not just reflecting on what he had lost, but calculating what he would do next. Because the world may have been shaken, and his name may have been dragged through the dirt, but nothing was more dangerous than a man like Sunny forced to adapt. The baptism may have marked the collapse of one era, but it also signaled the rise of another, one built not just on power, but on purpose. The adjustment was no longer just strategic, it was personal. And that made all the difference.